Before I get into today's video, I need to provide a trigger warning because we're going to be talking about themes involving intimate partner homicide, family annihilation, and domestic violence. If these are not things that you want to listen to right now, please feel free to skip this video and we can catch up in the next one. Today, I want to dive into the case of Hannah Clarke and her 3 children, Aaliyah, Leanna, and Trey, and their tragic death in February 2020. At the time, Hannah and her husband had separated, and on this day, Hannah was getting the children ready for school. She'd put them in the car, and she was ambushed by her ex, who doused them in gasoline and set them on fire, tragically ending their lives before ending his own life. It was a horrifying crime that really shook the nation, but what occurred afterwards was even more shocking. Today, I want to revisit this case in light of a recent investigation that has come to light around how the police handled some of the allegations that occurred post-separation and whether or not they could have prevented this horrible tragedy from occurring. I also want to discuss some of those early warning signs that I often talk about, because this case stands as a perfect example of why the system often does not support victims and will not be there to save you. But before we jump into all of that, if you're new here, my name is Tanya and I'm a family lawyer and mediator, and on this channel I like to discuss all things related to relationships, from dating to divorce. If that sounds like something that you're interested in, please consider subscribing, ring the notification bell, give this video a thumbs up if you like it, and let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you would like more information about my professional services, those will also be linked below for you. So let's start from the beginning, and I'll go through a little bit of a background of what we know about their relationship. So Hannah Clarke met the man who would become her husband and eventually her unaliver in 2008 when she was only about 19 or maybe having just turned 20. This man was about 11 years older than her, being in his early 30s. Right away, this is the first red flag that I want to highlight. While I am not necessarily against age gap relationships full stop, I do often worry about relationships with such a large age gap when the woman is so young. Usually, relationships like this will be marked by a significant power imbalance, and that is often what a perpetrator is looking for, hence why they will target young, inexperienced, and naive women. I personally think that, from my experience, I think the best rule of thumb is once you're in your late 20s, it's not as much of an issue, but when you're in your early 20s, like the first half of your 20s, do not date men that are significantly older. I would say no more than a year or 2. There is really no reason for why a 30-year-old man would want to be dating effectively a teenager. I don't care if she's legally an adult. If the number has the word teen in it, it's a problem. But even someone 10 years younger, it's too much. From what we know, this man was also already married and already had a child with his wife at the time. Now, this is the second warning sign. According to sources like people who were close to them, this man lied about the fact that he was married or said that the relationship was over and that they were already separated, which apparently wasn't exactly accurate. From what we know, he started pursuing a relationship with Hannah while he was still with his wife, and then within 4 months or so, he moved out of his matrimonial home to be with Hannah. Now, again, this can't be verified, but according to people who knew them, he had made threats to his first wife that he would essentially unalive her and their child if she ever left him. Now, obviously, Hannah would have had no way of knowing this. I'm not suggesting that she should have known, but I'm simply highlighting this because of the ease and quickness that this man seems to have swapped out one woman for another. That is a warning sign and another red flag that you should not ignore. If he can very quickly and seemingly without issue replace his whole family, like just walk away from one family and move on to the next, that is not a good person. And now that we're looking at it in hindsight, of course, we're looking at it through a different lens, but I can say that this is not an uncommon pattern, that a man who is very controlling and abusive will not tolerate his partner or his wife leaving him, but he is more than willing to leave the relationship at the drop of a hat. And it's part of that pattern of like, he gets to decide when the relationship ends and how it ends, and that's it. She does not get to decide that. For reference, a lot of the information that I have gleaned from this case came from a podcast that's called Small Steps for Hannah, where her family and friends, they're discussing it in hindsight, but they are giving information, and it's very interesting to listen to. If you are interested, I would highly recommend going and listening to the podcast, because I don't have time to go through all of it. But what has come out of that, from my perspective, is the way that all the people around her had different pieces of information that once they put it all together, a picture sort of started to emerge. And this is a little bit how we know what occurred. But in terms of the first wife, what was speculated, and what I would tend to agree with, is that his obsession and focus turned to Hannah as soon as he met her, and this was, in some kind of sick and twisted way, what saved his first wife, or what freed her from his grasp. Once he met Hannah, the relationship moved very quickly, and this is another classic warning sign. Usually it comes along with love bombing, and the aim is for the perpetrator to trap the victim quickly so that he can start dropping the act and also start exercising greater degrees of control. And this is why I very often caution women when I'm giving dating advice against moving too quickly. You want to take the relationship slowly. You want to have boundaries around your time, not see them all the time, not allow them to monopolize your time. These sort of boundaries will highlight very quickly whether or not you're dealing with somebody who is abusive and controlling, because they will not like having to abide by your boundaries. They don't like to be told no, and they always want to get things their way. So as soon as you start putting in place limitations or keeping them at arm's length, not wanting to move at the pace that they want to move, their true colors will start to come out. Now, I don't say any of this to blame Hannah. I just want to be really, really clear that I am not saying any of these things to place the blame or the onus on Hannah. She had no way of knowing any of this. We are learning now, again, through the benefit of hindsight. But I highlight these things so that young women can learn from this horrible tragedy and other cases like this, because this case follows exactly the same playbook as literally every other case that has a similar or same ending, and literally many other cases where abuse and control is present. And so understanding how these relationships tend to start is the best way to keep yourself safe, because as you will discover when we go through the case in more detail, the system is not going to keep you safe. The system failed Hannah and her 3 children, and it fails many other victims as well. So the best thing that young women can do is to study cases like this, learn the patterns, and learn how to recognize them when you are out there dating, so that you can get out before it's too late. Because once a man like this has you in his grasp, as I said, he will not let you go. He will not be the one who gets to decide when to leave the relationship. And he will make sure of that one way or the other. Now, once their relationship really commences, this is where we sort of piece together what was happening based on these secondhand reports. And as I said, listen to the podcast if you want all of that. But from what we know, the signs of coercive control were really present from the beginning, although they always start out really subtle. And Hannah herself didn't realize that she was in an abusive relationship. In fact, even a lot of her family and friends, when they discussed the case, even though there were things that kind of made them uncomfortable, they also didn't recognize that was necessarily abuse. And I think that's because, again, very often we see abuse as one thing, as anger and aggression and physical violence. We don't recognize that what is really behind what we see as abuse is this need for power and control. And sometimes it can manifest in more subtle ways, where there isn't a lot of physical abuse, where there isn't a huge amount of explosive anger, but where the perpetrator is exercising control in multiple different ways, through emotional manipulation, isolation, and fear and intimidation. So for example, friends and family would her life, where she was going, who she was spending time with, what she was doing, and this was always couched as concern, or like, just wanting to keep her safe. But it is described as going to to a point where people felt a little bit uncomfortable. But again, it was brushed aside because, oh well, you know, he just loves her that much. There were also reports that he would control what she could wear. Specifically, they owned a gym and he didn't want her wearing clothing that showed off her legs, so she had to always cover up even though they were exercising. Little things like that. Again, it was often portrayed as something that was for her benefit. He was just looking out for her. You know, the types of people they get at the gym, like you don't want them ogling your body, that sort of thing. But in reality, it was part of that pattern of behavior of controlling where she goes and who she's with and what she can wear. Another thing that was reported is how he tried to isolate her. And again, friends and family seem to report that he would do this by creating either fights or issues around who she was spending time with, how much time she would spend with her family, things like this. This is again another classic tactic that we see in controlling relationships because they want to isolate the victim. They do not want the victim to have a support network. They do not want the victim to be, let's say, discussing some of the concerns that they have with the perpetrator's behavior to people who are close to them, who could potentially provide support or help them get out of the relationship. There are also reports that there was coercive SA during the relationship. And I believe this is something that Hannah disclosed to her mother, that according to her in the podcast, you know, he expected intimacy every day, that she had to perform to a certain degree, that, you know, she did it to keep him happy because if she didn't, he would get angry with her. This is another very classic example of part of a pattern of abuse and control, essentially treating the victim like they belong to the perpetrator and that they get to do with them as they wish, that they exist for their pleasure and their amusement, essentially. That the victim's wants and needs are irrelevant to the perpetrator. This behavior continued to escalate during the relationship until about 2019 when Hannah made the decision to leave the relationship. Now, unfortunately, it is often the case that when women choose to leave abusive relationships, this is the most dangerous time for them. Because as I explained at the beginning, abusers and perpetrators of this sort of abuse in particular, this very controlling abuse, they feel like they are the ones who need to decide if and when the relationship ends and how that relationship will end. And they do not tolerate the idea that the other person can leave them. And this is why when people often frame these sort of cases like, oh, she should have left, she should have done this, she should have done that, as we will see, Hannah did all the right things. She realized that she was in a difficult and potentially dangerous situation, and she got her and her children out as best she could. She also took out a restraining order against him to try to protect her and the children. There are multiple examples. In this case, also had all of the hallmarks of what we see in cases that end in intimate partner homicide and family annihilation. First, as I said, there were threats that, you know, she was not allowed to leave him and what would happen if she did. There was stalking and monitoring of her and her movements post-separation. There were multiple breaches of the restraining order, including a physical assault. There was a prior non-lethal strangulation, and he abducted one of the children, and I believe he even traveled interstate with them. All of these things, when you look at them together, are hallmarks, like classic hallmark, that this behavior is escalating and that this man is dangerous and very likely will harm the children, her, and or himself. Particularly taking one of the children, because remember they had 3 children. And I have seen cases like this where it is not, as some people say, oh, just a father who wants to see his children and is being denied contact. Because it's important to note that despite the restraining order and despite Hannah's concerns around what he would do to her, she actually was not restricting contact with the children, and she was actually trying to work within the system to put in place contact arrangements for shared care. She actually didn't want to keep the children from him, and I believe from anyway what was reported and what she told people, that I don't think she thought that he would hurt the children. I think she was scared for her safety, and on many occasions said, given the opportunity that he would hurt her or even end her life, I don't know that she really believed believed he would hurt the children. So that's important to note, because when a man does this, and usually when it is done in circumstances where there are clear signs that there was abuse and controlling behavior, it is not, as it is often framed, oh, just a man trying to, spend time with his children, because that's being denied. No, it is a power move. It is very clearly meant to scare and intimidate their ex, to say, look what I can do. I can take your child from you, and who is going to stop me, and what are they going to do about it, because I'm the father. He never considered the impact on that child being taken from their mother and their siblings. Like, he didn't care. He only cared about himself, his feelings, and that is very clear because now we have police body cam about the incident when police came to recover the child, and he is clutching the child and crying. This is not a person who is focused on what is best for their child. This is somebody who is clearly in some type of crisis, and there needed to be intervention. But instead, the police were coaching him on how he can get around the restraining order, instead of recognizing that, oh, you know what, this guy really has problems and we need to intervene because he could potentially become dangerous. And that is just one example of the many failures of police in this case. As I said, a recent investigation has come out really looking at all of the failings of the system in the lead up to Hannah and her children's death. I will leave a link to an article in The Guardian which I think sets out really well all of the different details, but essentially what occurred was a lack of proper recording of all of the allegations that Hannah made. There are hundreds of text messages between her and a police officer detailing all of the behavior that she was concerned about, and all of the things that I said constitute very classic warning signs that this situation could potentially become lethal or in other ways dangerous. There was also a lot of victim blaming, a lot of scrutiny around some of the allegations, and a strong willingness to believe his version of events over hers with no evidence to support that, or despite the fact that all the evidence supported Hannah's version of events. A lot of what underpins the failures in the system is really just an ongoing misunderstanding about these control and power dynamics, the way that they play out, and those very crucial warning signs that, if missed or overlooked, can see behavior escalate to the point where we have now a very tragic case. Even simple things like overlooking breaches of a restraining order or not prosecuting an assault while there was a restraining order in place were all things that, had police pursued more vigorously, these people's lives. But too often, these types of situations are chalked up to, oh, yet another case of two people hating each other. But unfortunately, cases like this are very often treated as just another domestic. It's a domestic disturbance, or it's just all a bit of a nuisance of these two people who just hate each other. And police are very quick to believe that there are two sides to every story, and both people are somehow equally at fault when domestic situations end up in these types of cases where people are fighting and there's a restraining order, and they often very quickly brush aside what could be potential warning signs of serious behavior to come. And I have seen that play out in far too many cases. In fact, it's amazing to me how police will take things like assault and stalking much more seriously when it is a stranger perpetrating it than when it is somebody that you have had a relationship with. And that, I think, is one of the major failings in the system. Like, I promise you, if a man had come up to Hannah and, yelled at her and threatened her and grabbed her arm and tried to choke her or whatever exactly it was that occurred, yeah, they probably would have taken it a lot more seriously, which is sad to say. But instead, it's just like, oh, what did she do to instigate this? What did she do to make him mad? And that is always how these things tend to be framed. And that is a huge problem. And so while I hope that cases like this investigation, and the media that it has attracted will see changes to the system, I'm not going to hold my breath for the system to become great and adequate. even. It's never going to be foolproof, but let's just say we have a long way to go between where we are and like even good enough. And that's why so much of my content focuses on early warning signs, because like I said, that's really the best thing that you can do to protect yourself. I would not assume that the system will be on your side, that police will be there to help you, that a restraining order means anything. Instead, I would rather see women educating themselves about what coerced control really looks like, how it tends to manifest very early on, and how they can avoid ending up in the relationship in the first place, because that's really the only way to keep yourself safe. And with that, I think that I will end this video here. This has been a bit of a touchy subject, so thank you for watching. Please let me know what you think in the comments below. But again, let's use some sensitivity if we are going to discuss this case. If you liked this video, maybe you might want to check out one of these videos, and hopefully I will see you there. Bye for now.